First up, we have keel hauling. This is sort of like a terrible version of water skiing. There are many ways a pirate could land themselves in trouble with their peers. There was all sorts of ways they could be punished. One of the worst of the bunch was a method known as keel hauling. This resulted in the troubled pirate being tied to the back of the ship and tossed overboard. They would be dragged through the water on the end of the rope as the pirates on board would attempt to drag them to the other side of the ship. It was not the most common form of punishment, but it was definitely one of the worst of the bunch. It was a terrible experience to be tied to the back of the ship, but it could also result in irreversible consequences for the pirate who was tossed overboard. Many of them would often drown as they would be left underwater for long periods of time, so it's easy to see why this punishment was reserved for the very worst of the bunch. Next on our list is marooning. Welcome to Castaway in real life. Lots of people like to kick back on sunny beaches these days, but for many pirates, these quiet islands had a whole different meaning. Anyone who committed a serious crime that went against the pirate code could end up receiving this terrible fate. A person who was sentenced to marooning would be transported to a deserted island in the middle of nowhere and left to fend for themselves. The only things they would be left with were a firearm and a bottle of their favorite beverage. There would be no food left behind for them, and the ship would eventually head back into the waters and leave the disgraced pirate alone with their own thoughts. It was a long and agonizing way for anyone to go, so marooning was widely regarded as one of the worst punishments the pirates had come up with. This brutal desertion was also a stern way of making sure that everyone on board a ship kept themselves in line and stuck to the pirate code. Up next is walking the plank. This is the diving board that you couldn't climb back up. Out of all the punishments that existed in the peak era of piracy, this one is probably the most famous of the bunch. Everything from Pirates of the Caribbean to SpongeBob SquarePants has referenced this punishment in some capacity, but it was definitely one of the worst ways to go. This form of punishment was handed out to some of the worst pirates of them all who had committed some inexcusable crimes. While it was often used on rival pirates who had attempted to invade another clan's ship, it would also sometimes be used to banish any members who broke their own code. A long wooden plank would hang off the edge of a ship, and commanding officers would force their enemy towards the end of it. Of course, they really had no choice at this point but to dive into the water below. They could do their best to swim back to safety, but they would usually be so far from land that they stood absolutely no chance. Next up, we have clapped in irons. This was more of a humiliation than anything else. It was definitely far from the worst punishment a pirate could face, but it was something that everyone wanted to avoid. If a person was sentenced to be clapped in irons, they would usually be tossed into a dark corner of the ship for extended periods of time with very little food or water. If they did receive any nutrients, it would usually just be leftovers that other pirates did not want to eat. Sometimes this punishment would only last for a couple of hours, but repeat offenders might have to spend an entire day in this unfortunate predicament. While the dark corner was the usual place for the iron clapping, some pirates would actually be tied to the boom that hung off the front of the ship or left on the deck during a rainstorm. No matter where the commanders decided to place the disgraced pirate, they were guaranteed to be in for a very rough ride. After that, we have branding. Most people will associate this with cattle, but branding had a much different purpose for sailors on the high seas. This was actually a common method the authorities would use when they captured a pirate. This is pretty much exactly what you would picture, and it's something that every pirate on the high seas would want to avoid. Authorities would heat the branding stick to extremely hot temperatures and would place a very painful imprint on the criminal's body. This would usually be on a very visible body part such as the neck and the forehead to ensure the pirate would have to endure public humiliation for his antics. The branding image would often be the letter P to warn everyone that they encountered that a pirate was in their presence. Many shops and bars were either too scared of pirates or would simply refuse service to them, so having a giant P on your face would not help anyone's chances in town. Next on our list is the sun cage. A trip to a sunny island really wasn't a good thing for many pirates. Seems like largely deserted islands were incredibly popular with pirates for very dark reasons. While they would use the island to dispose of any unwanted members, the authorities also decided that this was an effective way to deal with the bad seeds in the world. British authorities who managed to catch any of the most wanted pirates in the Caribbean had one particular spot that they preferred to use for punishments. Dead Man's Key is a very small Caribbean island you can still visit today, but it has a very grisly past. British authorities would transport their captive pirates to the island and stuff them in large metal cages. The cages would then be hung from trees, and the convicted criminals would be left out in the sun for the rest of their time on Earth. This was a brutal way for anyone to go, and it must have been absolutely terrifying for any unsuspecting visitors to discover these cages. This was a clear message from the authorities, however, that they meant business.
At number 5, marooning. Let's talk about the brutal yet mysterious practice of marooning, and no, we're not talking about Maroon 5. Marooning was a pirate punishment, probably the most dreaded punishment punishment of them all, where someone who committed a serious offense would be taken to a deserted island and then left there. No food, no water, just you and the island. For many, this was a slow and painful death. Being left on an island in the hot sun meant you got badly sunburnt, you had no food unless you could find something in the area, and chances were that there was no fresh water on that island, so you would become dehydrated quite quickly. At high tide, the water could flood the island, or you would be left standing in water up to your neck, and any predators in the area would have seen you as a little snack. This sounds like a terrible way to go. I could not imagine the physical and psychological torment that would come with such a fate. Man, I'm glad I'm not a pirate.
Number 4. Pirate curfew. This next one made me laugh out loud while I was reading up on it. It doesn't matter how badass or cool you think you are, even if you're a literal pirate, you still have a bedtime. These guys would straight up abandon their mateys, they would leave them on an island to die, and then sword fight over treasure. But come 8 o'clock, it's time to shut her down. Because it's pirate code, you can't break the code. Captain Blackbeard Bartholomew Roberts, he insisted back in 1722 that lights and candles were out at 8 o'clock sharp. If anybody wanted to stay up later than 8, they can go and hang out on the deck. Honestly, I love this rule. I'm here for this. Imagine roommates being on board for this as well. Nowadays, you get the best sleep of your life. Thing is, these guys needed all the time they could get because they had to sleep in hammocks. Not the most comfortable or relaxing environment. A hammock nap, sure, but a hammock sleep every night? No wonder pirates were so angry. It's starting to make sense.
At number 3, cryptic treasure. There once lived a pirate named Olivier Levasseur, and he was considered one of the last great pirates. Over the years, it was said that Levasseur had stolen many treasures of great value and had a large haul of precious finds. Once people finally caught up to him, he was captured and sentenced to death by hanging, but before he died, his final words were, quote, "Find my treasure, the one who may understand it," end quote. And then he threw a cryptogram into the crowd, and that was the last of them. To this day, no one has been able to decipher the code. Some believe that perhaps this cryptic message was simply designed to lead people on a wild goose chase as a final joke. However, in the 20th century, a man named Reginald Herbert Cruz Wilkins, say that 5 times fast, made a breakthrough. He had been searching for the treasure for years and finally found the cave that he believed the treasure was located. Unfortunately, the cave's conditions made it impossible to get through, so the treasure remains a mystery to this day. Can you believe this all started because a pirate wanted to pull a Da Vinci Code on us? Unbelievable.
Number 2. Julius Caesar. Pirates would often take people and demand treasure. They would use hostage situations as a main ploy. In fact, at one point in history, pirates managed to scoop up Julius Caesar. Like the Julius Caesar. The Emperor of Rome went through his fair share of trials, and at just age 25, he was held captive for 38 days with pirates. That's a very long time to hear horrible sea chanties. When pirates demanded ransom for the release of the young man, they set his price for 20 talents, but according to historians, that price was deemed too low from Caesar himself. He actually laughed at it and reminded these pirates that they had no idea who it was they captured. He said to ask for 50 instead of 20. How insane is that?
And finally, at number 1, pirate tunnels. You know the secret tunnel from Avatar: The Last Airbender? Well, this secret pirate tunnel is kind of similar. Below the city of Savannah, Georgia lies a series of underground tunnels that are believed to have been used by pirates. The pirates would use these tunnel systems to smuggle goods in and out of the area, as well as to smuggle captured sailors. It is said that these tunnels would lead directly to the location where the ships would have been waiting in the harbor. Apparently, there is a tunnel that led from a building in town known as the Pirate's House all the way to the river where small rowing boats would have been waiting. It has also been theorized that the Sons of Liberty, a group of people who strongly opposed the British government, would also use these pirate tunnels to meet up and have a little shindig. There are so many mysteries that surround these pirate tunnels, and many of them remain unsolved.
Number 10, Blackbeard, the pirate's pirate. A rough-looking, no-good, rotten privateer who sailed the seas looking for booty to plunder, and I'm not talking about chest of gold. The captain of the Queen Anne's Revenge, a mighty vessel with enough cannons to make any sailor sweat, as well as fierce and intimidating appearances. Captain Blackbeard was said to even tangle fuses in his facial hair and ignite them, making his face appear as if it were in a cloud of fiery smoke. That is crazy. That's like beyond like Post Malone, man, it's a crazy look. While it may seem like theatrics, it was more of a scare tactic, and he was one pirate that was for sure to be feared. Scary dude. Don't cross Blackbeard. The Queen Anne's Adventure. Number 9, Francis Drake. Sic Parvis Magna, greatness from small beginnings. That may sound familiar to PlayStation fans of the Uncharted series. Francis Drake was an English explorer, captain, and Navy expert. He's most well known for travels and circumnavigation. That's all fine and dandy. However, Francis Drake's expeditions weren't exactly without scandal, as they were also pirating expeditions, as the Queen had basically instructed him to plunder Spanish ships and ports on his way. Which he did. Well, why not? The Queen says you gotta do it, you gotta do it. His biggest prize came in March 1579 when he seized the Spanish treasure ship, the Nuestra Señora de la Concepción, and liberated it of a dozen chests of coins, 80 pounds of gold, and 26 tons of silver. Wow, that's a lot of loot. He even shared a lot of his booty with his fellow mates and financial backers. Very Robin Hood of you, sir. I commend, yeah, that's nice. Number 8, Black Bart. Bartholomew Roberts may have been the most successful pirate, at least according to vessels captured, with somewhere ranging a total of 400 ships in his lifetime. Estimated, of course. A vicious and brutal man, he was a natural-born pirate. He spent most of his life on pirate ships before becoming captain himself. He adopted the pirate code and may have been the first pirate to fly colors. Interesting. One thing for sure, there would never be a Welshman so nasty as Black Bart ever again. He was operating all over the globe, America, Canada, South America, Africa. He eventually would meet his end in battle, but was gallantly remembered for his piracy by other pirates. Number 7, Grace O'Malley. The golden age of piracy was a long time ago, so yeah, there's not going to be that many female pirates. That's how it goes. However, the female pirates that were around were pretty nasty, and it seems whenever a fair lass gets behind the helm of a ship, they seem to do very well, like Grace O'Malley. Even at a young age, she was showing signs of rebellious leadership. She was stubborn and in her ways. She cut her hair in defiance as a youth. The girl was stubborn, she wouldn't listen. That grit is what made her a very successful pirate, and to this day, remembered to the Irish as a hero. She's got a couple statues around. I don't have a statue, I wish I did. Number 6, Captain Morgan. Pirate, businessman, and rum. My knowledge of Captain Morgan goes about as far as high school parties in your mom's basement, or enjoying a refreshing cocktail with too much sun at the Coddy and the Muskokas, bro. In actuality, he was a ruthless pirate who made his fortune plundering Spanish ships. Spanish had a lot of trade going to and from the New World, so it kinda just makes sense. Well, after he made his do-re-mi, he did the next sensible thing and invested in some land. And by that I mean he owned plantations, so yeah, he wasn't such a nice dude. Diversifying is great, anyone will tell you that, but not like that. That's not a good business. We don't like that here. Like a lot of the pirates on this list, his early life is pretty much unknown. So all that's down on record is that he was a devious criminal who oftentimes was trying to dodge the crown.
Number 5, Howell Davis. Howell Davis was a Welsh pirate born in 1690. His pirate career lasted only 11 months, from July 1718 to June 1719, when he was ambushed and killed. His ships were the Cadogan, the Buck, the St. James, and the Rover. Davis captured more than 15 English and French ships in those 11 months. Whoa. Having enjoyed the short career, this young pirate captured the entire Caribbean's attention with his navigational skills and daring nature to take on ships much larger than his own. He was pretending to be a legitimate privateer, commanding naval ships until he snuck on and held them up. He would fly black flags from ships in the area to pretend that he had a bigger fleet. When he tried to kidnap the governor of Portugal, acting like he was a Royal Navy pirate hunter, they caught on though, and he was ambushed. Ballsy pirate, very ballsy. Sneaking around all Assassin's Creed Black Flag style ship to ship. Dude, I love it. Number 4, Bartholomew Roberts. Bartholomew Roberts, aka Black Bart, born 1682, was a Welsh pirate who raided ships in the Americas and West Africa early to the mid-1700s. When I say he raided ships, I mean he was the most successful pirate during the golden age of piracy if we are measuring how many vessels were actually stolen. He captured, looted, and kept over 400 ships. That's like 400 battles. 400 times he was like, hey, yeah, we're gonna take your ship, okay? His largest flagship was a 40-cannon behemoth. It was sailed by over 200 men. The ship could fight off any British Royal Navy ship at the time. A notorious pirate. He was young when he started pirating too, learning under Howell Davis on how to actually pirate. He was a natural. He came up with pirate codes too. No talking about money, no fights on the ship, everybody has a say. He learned the do's and don'ts, and then he pretty well captured the entire region of the Caribbean and West Indies. Yeah. Number 3, Calico Jack. Calico Jack, John Rackham, was one of the most unique pirates during the golden age of piracy. Born in England, not very charismatic, and failed to get an enormous wealth, but what he did go down in history for was his flag designs and for his 2 female pirate crew members slash love interests whom he shared romantic relationships with, camaraderie with, and sword fights back to back with. He started on a small crew pirating small vessels until he stole a much larger ship named the Kingston and became the captain of his crew. While in port, he met a young lady by the name of Anne Bonny, a married woman whom he'd run off to sea with. The flag commonly associated with Rackham depicts the classic white skull above crossed swords on a black background, and Rackham is credited with inventing and designing the quote, Jolly Roger first design. Dude, artist, lover, pirate, again, where are these movies? Number 2, Qing Shi. Born in 1775 in Guangdong province, Qing was thrown into work as she was famous within the province for her beauty, hospitality, and intelligence, attracting a certain pirate Zheng Yi in 1801 who asked for her hand in marriage. She agreed, but only if she was paid a heavy price and she could command his ship and crew. She began implementing strict guidelines about equality, status or sex aside. Qing took full control with progressive policies, and even other fleets joined her pirate empire, creating the largest pirate fleet in history known as the Red Flag Fleet. We're talking thousands she commanded. She had 3 rules. If you sneak off, you're out. If you steal, you're out. And if you harass women, you're out. Coined the Pirate Queen, Qing even broke up the Confederation in 1810 and negotiated a deal with the Chinese government. The pirates were pardoned for their crimes, allowed to keep their vessels, and even had a place amongst the Chinese army. And coming at the number 1 spot, of course, Blackbeard. Edward Teach, born 1680 in Bristol, England. He's probably the most infamous and revered pirates on this list and in history of the 7 seas. Blackbeard intimidated enemies by coiling smoking fuses into his long braided facial hair and by slinging multiple pistols and daggers across his chest. Can you imagine? This guy must have been terrifying to look at. In 1717, he captured a French ship, renamed it the Queen Anne's Revenge, and decked it out with about 50 guns. With that firepower then, he blockaded the port of Charlestown, South Carolina, holding the entire town at ransom until the residents met his demands for their huge supply of medicines. After laying low after holding up a town, Blackbeard was then killed in battle by the British Navy out for his arrest. Legend says that he had 20 stab wounds and 5 bullet wounds before finally sinking to Davy Jones' locker. His head was suspended from the bow of the enemy ship and then placed upon a spike at Chesapeake Bay for years, warning other pirates of his capture and demise. Dude, dark times, huh?
In at number 10 is Big Pierre. His given name was Pierre Gerlof Donia, a farmer in the 15th century who had had his village, which is now in modern-day Netherlands, pillaged and his wife violated. Devastated, Piers formed a militia named the Armor Blackheath to fight against the Crusades of the Holy Roman Empire. Pierre was a great swords handler, using one that was 7 feet long with ease due to his enormous stature and strength, and so he was named Big Pierre, and he inspired some big fear. He had a unique way to identify suspected enemies. He forced them to say a sentence in the Frisian language that, when translated, is butter, bread, and green cheese. If you can't say that, you're not a real Frisian. The words butter, bread, and green cheese were immensely difficult for a Dutchman or a German to pronounce correctly in the Frisian language due to their accents, even when fluent in the language. A careful strategist, Pierre was said to have as many as 100 vessels fall to him, and while his original goal was to bring people independence, Big Pierre became clouded by power, abandoning the cause for riches. In 1519, after only 4 years of pirating, Pierre retired, living out the rest of his life on land until he died peacefully in his sleep. Number 9 is Frenchman Francois Leonas. He too was born under another name, Jean Davenant, but changed of his own accord to Francois after time's servitude in the Spanish colonies. When released, Francois hated all things Spanish, and that paired very poorly with his inherent violence. He was known for his extreme torture and brutality of others, using his barbaric ways to threaten enemies and the crown alike. The rumors of dismemberment, flaying, guttings, and more reached far and wide in the 17th century. Francois was a brilliant strategist to boot and was able to overpower his enemies in just a few hours, so he was rarely challenged by those who recognized his ship. One of his biggest accomplishments was the ransacking of the city Maracaibo in Venezuela. Believed to be impenetrable with a 16-cannon defense and army, it couldn't stop Francois, and once inside the city, he brutalized innocent civilians to have them admit the location of their treasure. When he found it, enthralled by the wealth, he pressed on and landed at the coast of Cartagena. It's there that karma of his action towards those civilians came back around, and he was torn limb by the inhabitants of the island, and so Francois was feared no more. You really reap what you sow. Number 8 is the Scourge of the Pirate Coast, otherwise known as Rama ibn Jabir, and the most tolerated pirate that ever infested any seas. Rama was a Bahraini pirate who lived through the 18th century and into the 19th. A violent man, Rama suffered a number of injuries, losing an eye and most of the use of one of his right arms. So that created a terrifying image. What made him so tolerable though was the fact that he was careful to leave British ships alone so as not to anger the crown. His sight was set solely on Al Khalifa, the rival clan to his own, the Al Jalama, who had been at war for nearly 20 years before he even became a pirate. Nearly 2,000 men followed him, and the majority of them were freed African slaves. His brutality was his undoing, however. It actually united the Arab forces to defeat him in the Battle of 1820. Even when defeated, he was determined not to die at the hands of the Al Khalifa. Standing next to gunpowder kegs on his ship, he held his son's hand, took a look at his crew and the ship, and lit the gunpowder. The explosion sank his ship and took everyone with it. Number 7 is the Black Caesar. Caesar starts as a prominent chief in West Africa. He evades colonialists for a while, but eventually is captured and starts the transport process to the USA. But as they neared Florida, a hurricane's sudden appearance threatened the ship. A sailor aboard who had recognized Caesar for his immense strength and keen intelligence snuck below decks and freed him. Making an alliance with one another, the two forced the captain and the crew aside and boarded one of the longboats with munitions and supplies. It's this lifeboat that starts their piracy. Posing as shipwrecked sailors, they would board ships who stopped to assist them, then pull weapons and demand the supplies and the loot. Caesar and the sailor continued this ploy for years, amassing treasure which they buried on Elliot Key, the island that he had made his home. Unfortunately, the term bros before, hadn't been invented yet, and the two dueled over a woman they'd met aboard on one of their looted ships. Caesar blew his friend many years away like that. Turned out to be fine for him though. The lone pirate attracted a small crew that amassed over time until it eventually merged with the famous Edward Blackbeard Teaches Company. When the famous pirate Blackbeard was captured, so was Caesar, and he was one of the pirates alongside him who were sentenced to death by the authorities in Virginia in 1718. Video game people will know this one because number 6 is Anne Bonny. She famously showed up in Assassin's Creed and also in Black Sails and Fina Pirate Princess and much more pop culture. She was an illegitimate child, and when she was betrothed to a man by her father, who she hated, Anne resisted and did the biggest teen rebellion move of the 17th century. She ran away with a pirate. She married John Bonny in 1718, and the two traveled to New Providence, Bahamas, where John became an informant for the governor there. Teen Anne got bored of her husband's newfound politics. She wanted adventure and danger, so again she runs off, this time with pirate John Rackman, aka Calico Jack, in 1720. Calico Jack commandeered the sloop William and had Anne join him as an equal partner. Having a shared captainship wasn't unheard of, but a woman being one of them was. She only ever hid her identity as a woman from other ships. Her own was very accepting of her. It's 1720 that sloop William was raided. Most of the pirates on board were too intoxicated to fight back, and so they were taken to Jamaica for their trials. Bonny won a stay of execution due to her visible pregnancy and was released also because of her father's influence. She had had her exciting years, now she could go back to her normal privileged life. She married, had children, and lived out the remainder happily. All the while, the last words she said to Calico Jack, her husband she left to be executed, was, "Had you had fought like a man, you need not have been hanged like a dog." Close your eyes and hold your nose, it's pirate medicine. Nobody I want to take medical advice from more than STD-riddled, scurvy-infected, melanoma-having pirates. This is because traditionally, pirates never went to shore for medical. Whether the flu, scurvy, or a compound fracture, your ass is staying on that boat, so somebody's gonna fix it whether you like it or not, or how they do it. Yay, traditionalism. It was insanely important that the surgeon was treated well by the crew and the cap. Without him, the entire cruise could be rendered useless, and for example, when Archibald Murray had left the ship of Black Bart in 1720 after a disagreement, no one else knew how to amputate limbs or prevent gangrene, and an attack from a raid left half the crew in need of medical aid, so with no other options, the wounded were given enough rum to lessen their pain and left to die. It
became known a good surgeon was worth their weight in gold, and so captains were known to even compete or kidnap them. Surgeons were able to read and write, and they also had the rare knowledge of Latin since all medicine bottles were labeled in that language. Surgeons who plied their trade at sea were often from a lineage of sea surgeons, who long since sailed with the Roman warships, and during medieval times a companioned nobility, aka they were literate, could navigate, and had seen the world desirable. How good were they at their jobs is unknown though, but the equipment they had to work with was pretty medieval, such as the pump clister and the mortar and pestle, or this urethra syringe used to help inject mercury so to help with the effects of STDs. Yikes. Another pirate tradition, talking like a normal person. We've had a bad habit in recent years of glorifying the pirate era and comparing it to the modern progressive ideals we have today. If you watched my video, Top 10 Real Pirate Sea Captains Feared the Most, you'd know that quite a few captains were visible ethnicities, women, or both, as were the crews of most ships. So yes, absolutely, pirates were so much more diverse and cared less about races and religions than times in history before, after, and happening around them. But don't think there wasn't a lot of xenophobia, sexism, still going around. The strongholds discussed in point 2 spread between Africa, Asia, America, and the Caribbean Isles. A big mix of people and a lot of accents and languages. Most pirates, despite illiteracy, were fluent in multiple languages and moved far from home. So let's talk pirate accent, because the "arr" and the "shiver me timber" crap is far from accurate, and a diverse group of people weren't all saying the same things in the same ways, let alone that cornily. So, where'd it come from? Disney. Same people that made y'all think Pocahontas actually runs off with a white man of her own will, and they orphaned Bambi in front of all of us and when we were like 7 years old. Many of the phrases we associate with pirates originate from the 1950 Disney live-action film Treasure Island, based off the 1883 novel. Newton's performance, full of references to landlubbers and booty, not only stole the show, it permanently shaped pop culture's vision on how pirates looked, act, and spoke. And speaking of looks, how about logical accessorizing? These guys weren't dummies. You try to keep a ship afloat. I mean, do you know how to use a compass, bud? Teasing aside, they really were ingenuitive with earrings, so here's how. According to National Geographic, sailors believed that applying pressure to the earlobe would ward off seasickness. Unfortunately, while piercing your teeth can help alleviate migraines, earrings in your earlobes do nothing. But cannonballs were accompanied by a loud blast known to deafen people, so pirates would use the hoops to hold wads of wax that they could flip up and press into their ears as a makeshift plug while firing the cannon. Another use was funeral insurance. Their earrings could be taken, melted, and used to pay for their burial, no matter how far their body washed at sea. Some even engraved the names of their home port on the inside of the earrings so that bodies could be sent for proper burial. Other strategic accessorizing was eye patches, not used for blindness, rather keep one eye adjusted to the dark for trips below deck. And don't forget Blackbeard's notorious power move of braiding hemp in his beard so he could start it on fire and terrify everyone. Also, it was hemp burning in his face. From Jamaica, so Blackbeard would have quite literally been flying high. Watch out when you say ahoy matey, it may not be what you think. Acknowledged since the 1600s, matelotage developed in an environment where crewmates often knew each other more intimately than the wives they'd left beyond on land. In some cases, it was just an affectionate friendship to fill the emotional void. Others, it was fraternal brotherly love. In most, romantic and sensual love. Originally an economic partnership label, one pirate would agree with another that they could inherit the remaining fortune after leaving part of the dead man friends or to his wife. But regardless of the type of matelotage, pirates took the bonds very seriously. In pirate society, two men could join a matelotage and share all their plunder, even receiving death benefits if one died before the other. Pirate mates would live together, exchange gold rings. Though the bonds of matelotage were respected on board, same-sex unions were highly stigmatized on land. How stigmatized? Well, in Tortuga, Governor Levasseur wrote to France in 1645 requesting the government send some painted ladies to the colony in hopes the presence of more women would curb this issue. However, the plan backfired and some bisexual pirates began marrying the working girls to share them with their also bisexual partners. And last but not least, the shocking ritual of crossing the line. Pirates and sailors were, and still are, notoriously superstitious people. One of the most common rituals was the ceremony of crossing the line. The first time a ship crossed the equator from north to south during the voyage, everyone on the ship who had never made the crossing was forced to undergo a ceremony of sorts, in which, with great pageantry, they're summoned by Neptune, a pirate in a Neptune costume, and ducked in the sea unless they can pay a fine to escape it. That fine would go towards the actual money pool. The ceremony could also involve play act characters like Davy Jones or Neptune's bride, mock trials, ritual shaving, and dancing in the evening to celebrate. It was fun, but also deadly serious. Most sailors couldn't swim, ironically, but the ceremony was never forbidden, and everyone from the captain on down was required to pay a fine to avoid participation. Some pirates have rituals that are darker versions of the carnivalesque line crossing pranks. The behavior of pirate Francis Spriggs is reputably some of the most violent and sociopathic of the Golden Ages in 1720s. Captain Richard Hawkins, Spriggs' former prisoner, describes a number of Saw movie-esque games such as forcing captives to eat a dish of candles and tacks, or forcing prisoners to run inside a circle of candles while being pricked by forks, knives, and the sharp ends of compasses and in the backside, which during a violin would play a merry jig.